Imagine standing on a quiet island where the wind whispers secrets that no one can fully understand. You walk along a deserted shore, your footsteps the only sound, and yet you feel eyes watching you, eyes that vanished centuries ago. Trees sway as if holding their breath, and the waves lap softly, hiding stories of people who simply disappeared. No footprints, no smoke from fires, no bodies. Only a single word carved into wood, bold and mysterious. Croatoan. It has been over 400 years, and historians, explorers, and dreamers have searched for answers. But the island refuses to reveal its secrets. Who were these people? Where did they go? Why did they vanish without a trace? This is the story of America's first lost colony, a story of hope, ambition, betrayal, survival, and disappearance. A story that begins not with answers, but with a question that has haunted the nation for centuries. The streets of London in 1587 were alive with chaos and energy. Merchants shouted over carts and clattering hooves, hawking cloth, spices, iron tools, and everything else imaginable. Ships groaned in the Thames as sailors prepared for voyages across the Atlantic. In the midst of it all, Sir Walter Raleigh plotted. He was a man of daring ambition, charming enough to sway the Queen herself, ruthless enough to seize opportunity wherever it appeared. He imagined colonies not merely as trading posts, but as footholds for an empire that could rival Spain. He imagined families crossing the ocean, planting roots in a wild land, and creating a society that could thrive where none had before. Raleigh's first expedition in 1585 had been largely military, composed of soldiers sent to establish a foothold, build fortifications, and map the coast. They found fertile land, dense forests, abundant wildlife, and a coastline that promised both trade and security. But they also encountered hostility from the native Algonquian tribes, shortages of supplies, disease, and the relentless challenges of the Atlantic. Within months, the soldiers returned to England, leaving the fort abandoned, the land reclaimed by forest and silence. Raleigh refused to accept defeat. He envisioned a second, bolder attempt, this time with families and craftsmen, a colony intended to endure and flourish. To lead this effort, Raleigh appointed John White, a man of careful observation and gentle character, skilled in cartography and painting, who had traveled to the New World before. White understood the beauty and danger of the land, the complexity of the tribes, and the enormity of the task ahead. In the spring of 1587, he led 115 settlers across the Atlantic. Among them were carpenters, blacksmiths, farmers, mothers, and children, each carrying the fragile hope of a new beginning. White's daughter Eleanor, pregnant with her first child, embodied that hope, for her daughter Virginia would become the first English baby born in America. The voyage was grueling, as months at sea tested courage and endurance. Storms battered the ships, scurvy and seasickness claimed lives, and fear pressed constantly on the minds of every passenger. The smell of salt, rotting food, and unwashed bodies filled the tight quarters. Sailors shouted orders, Mothers comforted crying infants, and men prayed quietly, wondering if they would see land again. Each day was measured by the sun's movement, the state of the sails, and the diminishing stores of food and water. Some nights, the ocean seemed to swell with invisible threats, waves rising higher than the tallest masts, winds howling like ancient spirits. Yet, amidst fear, anticipation carried them onward. Finally, after weeks of uncertainty and peril, they sighted Roanoke Island. Exhaustion melted into awe at the thick forests, winding rivers, and endless coastline that promised both challenge and opportunity. The air was warm, thick with the scent of pine and salt, and the sounds of birds, insects, and the distant waves formed a symphony both unfamiliar and mesmerizing. Yet the signs of previous expeditions' failures were obvious. Timber from the abandoned fort lay broken and scattered, and subtle signs suggested conflict or hasty retreat. Local tribes observed them cautiously, some offering guidance, others keeping their distance, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Some of the settlers felt a creeping unease, as if the land itself were watching and judging them, testing their resolve. Others were captivated by the strange beauty of the island, enchanted by the endless possibilities it seemed to promise. There was hope, but there was also fear. Survival in this land would demand every ounce of courage, patience, and ingenuity they could muster. The settlers set to work immediately. Men felled trees with axes, crafted rudimentary shelters, and cleared plots for crops. Farmers planted corn, beans, and squash, attempting to adapt English agricultural methods to new soil and climate conditions. Blacksmiths maintained tools, repaired broken implements, and fashioned weapons for hunting. Women tended to cooking, clothing, and children, while offering guidance to the younger girls in weaving and sewing. Families huddled together at night, telling stories to ease fear, while the forest beyond hummed with unknown creatures and the rustle of unseen movement. Children learned early that the forest could be both a source of food and a source of danger. Food was a constant concern. Fish and shellfish supplemented meager harvests. Hunting provided meat, but required skill and knowledge of the terrain. The settlers began to rely on the guidance of friendly tribes like the Croatoan, who taught them how to fish with nets, track deer, and identify edible plants. Trust with these tribes was fragile. Friendly gestures were cautiously observed, and any misstep could escalate into hostility. The colonists had to balance curiosity and diplomacy, learning quickly that survival depended not only on the land, but on their interactions with its original inhabitants. Disease and injury were ever-present threats. Cuts and scrapes became infected easily. Fevers spread through small quarters, and malnutrition weakened the body's natural defenses. Children and infants were especially vulnerable, and despite the settlers' best efforts, sickness claimed some lives. Every day was an exercise in vigilance, improvisation, and perseverance. The colonists learned to ration food, store water, and protect themselves from the unpredictable elements. Despite hardship, moments of joy emerged. Virginia Dare was born, a symbol of hope and continuity for the colony. Weddings, births, and small celebrations broke the monotony of labor, providing a brief respite and strengthening bonds within the community. These small victories reminded the settlers of why they had undertaken this perilous journey: to create a new life in a new land, to plant roots where none had grown before, and to leave a legacy that might endure long after their own lives ended. John White maintained detailed sketches and notes, documenting the land, the colony, and the people. His maps recorded waterways, potential threats, and areas suitable for expansion. His artwork captured the flora and fauna, the appearance of the settlers, and glimpses of the surrounding tribes. These records would later serve as crucial evidence for historians trying to understand what had occurred, though they could never capture the full story of hope, fear, and human resilience that played out on the island. As months turned into seasons, subtle signs emerged that some colonists were considering relocation or strengthening relations with nearby tribes. Knowledge of the land improved with each day. Some families experimented with hunting further inland, discovering new resources and hazards. Storms occasionally destroyed crops or shelters, forcing repair and adaptation. The settlers' lives became a constant dance with nature, learning its rhythms and respecting its power, all while maintaining hope that England would soon send aid and supplies. Life on Roanoke Island settled into a rhythm dictated by necessity and fear. Each morning began before sunrise, the chill of dawn pressing against thin clothing. Men carried axes, hoes, and plows into the dense forest, searching for fertile soil, fallen timber, and game. They chopped trees, cleared brush, and dug furrows for the crops that might sustain them through the months to come. Women stirred fires and cooked porridge or stew, using the sparse provisions they had brought from England. Some attempted to plant gardens close to the shelters, while others tended the crops spread further inland, guided by lessons from the Croatoan people. Children accompanied their parents, learning through observation and labor, becoming acquainted with the ways of the land that would define their childhoods. The forest was alive in ways the settlers had never encountered. Birds with bright feathers darted between trees, their calls sharp and foreign. Small mammals scurried unseen beneath underbrush, and the rustle of leaves suggested that something always watched. At night, distant howls, the cry of an owl, or the snap of a branch could unsettle even the most seasoned adult. Despite the fear, there was wonder as well, a sense that this land, though dangerous, held secrets, resources, and beauty unlike anything in England. Food scarcity remained a pressing concern. Corn, beans, and squash provided the base of their diet, yet crop yields were unpredictable. Rainfall varied greatly. Floods could wash away seeds, and drought could wither the fragile sprouts. Fishing in the nearby rivers and inlets supplemented the diet, but required constant vigilance and learning. White and other men experimented with various traps and nets, while the Croatoan taught them how to catch eels and crabs, which became vital sources of protein. Hunting deer, rabbits, and birds offered meat, but was exhausting and risky. Poisonous snakes and venomous insects added hidden dangers, reminding the settlers that the wilderness was indifferent to their survival. Interactions with native tribes were fraught with tension and cautious diplomacy. Some tribes were welcoming, sharing knowledge of edible plants, hunting techniques, and safe travel routes. Others were wary, observing the newcomers silently, assessing their intentions and capabilities. Occasional skirmishes occurred, often sparked by misunderstandings over property, hunting grounds, or cultural differences. White and his men learned quickly that survival depended on tact as much as strength. Trade developed slowly. Metal tools and cloth in exchange for furs, food, and guidance. The settlers learned the value of alliances and the fragile balance between friendliness and offense. Sickness loomed constantly over the colony. Fever, dysentery, and infections spread quickly in cramped quarters, and children were particularly vulnerable. Despite efforts at cleanliness, medicine from England was limited, and many remedies were improvised from local herbs and plants, with mixed results. The psychological toll of isolation, fear, and constant labor weighed heavily. Settlers struggled with homesickness, worry for family left behind, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Yet there were moments of joy and normalcy. Births, small celebrations, and communal gatherings around fire provided solace and strengthened social bonds, reminding everyone why they had undertaken this perilous journey. As the colony grew, so did its understanding of the land. White's maps and sketches became more detailed, noting rivers, islands, forests, and potential areas for expansion. They discovered safe freshwater sources, learned which crops thrived in which soil, and gradually adapted English agricultural methods to the new environment. Some colonists experimented with food preservation, drying corn and storing fish, while others created small workshops for tools and repairs. Yet no matter how efficient their labor, they were acutely aware that their survival was precarious, dependent on weather, crops, alliances, and the eventual return of ships from England. Time passed, and subtle changes suggested that the colonists might consider moving closer to friendly tribes for protection and resources. White and his officers made exploratory journeys inland and along the coast, noting safer locations, observing wildlife, and attempting to understand the terrain. Each expedition reinforced the harsh reality. The New World demanded vigilance, ingenuity, and courage. Stories of storms, flooding, and hidden dangers were shared around fires at night, preparing families for what might come. Winter approached, and the cold was harsher than many expected. Houses made from timber and thatch offered limited insulation. Families huddled together for warmth, relying on blankets, fires, and each other. Food reserves were stretched thin, and hunting in the winter forest was perilous. Settlers learned to make use of dried corn, nuts, and smoked meats, while the Croatoan shared techniques for preserving food through freezing and drying. Illness became more common as the body struggled with both cold and scarcity. The psychological strain was immense. Nights were long, and the wind howled through the trees like a living entity. During these months, alliances with local tribes became essential. The Croatoan and other friendly tribes provided guidance on safe shelters, winter fishing, and protection from hostile groups. Communication was challenging, relying on gestures, broken English, and careful observation. Misunderstandings could quickly escalate into danger, but successful exchanges strengthened the colonists' chances of survival. Some settlers began to adopt native practices, learning to dress appropriately for the climate, forage for food, and navigate the forest efficiently. The birth of children, including Virginia Dare, offered hope amidst uncertainty. Celebrations were modest but meaningful. Small gatherings, songs, and prayers reinforced community bonds. Each child represented continuity, the survival of culture and lineage, and a tangible reason to endure hardships. Parents balanced nurturing with labor, as everyone's contribution was necessary for the collective welfare of the colony. Despite these efforts, not all moments were joyful. Deaths occurred from disease, accidents, or malnutrition. Families mourned quietly, often with no proper ceremony, as survival required immediate attention to ongoing labor and care for others. The emotional toll compounded the physical strain, shaping a community that was resilient but constantly tested. By the time spring arrived, the settlers had become more confident in their abilities to work with the land, understand the seasons, and interact with friendly tribes. Cornfields were larger, shelters sturdier, and fishing skills more refined. Yet, the absence of supplies from England was keenly felt. Letters and reports from White had promised aid, but political and military events in Europe delayed any return. This prolonged isolation intensified anxiety, forcing settlers to become even more resourceful. Explorations continued. Small groups traveled further inland, mapping terrain, observing wildlife, and assessing threats. They discovered rivers teeming with fish, fertile lands suitable for expansion, and signs of both potential allies and adversaries among native tribes. These journeys were not without danger. Forests were dense, storms could arise unexpectedly, and some paths led to areas with hostile tribes. The settlers learned to travel cautiously, often in pairs or small groups, relying on both observation and the guidance of friendly natives. As the first year drew to a close, the settlers began to consider constructing more permanent structures. Using timber, stone, and clay, they reinforced homes and created rudimentary storage facilities. Tools were repaired and sharpened, seeds stored carefully, and knowledge of hunting grounds passed to younger members of the colony. The community had survived, learned, and adapted, but the constant uncertainty about the future loomed over every decision. The second year of life on Roanoke Island tested every skill, every ounce of courage the settlers possessed. Spring had arrived with a fragile warmth, coaxing plants from the soil, but also bringing heavy rains that turned fields to mud and rivers to rushing torrents. The settlers worked tirelessly to repair damage from storms, mend shelters, and sow new crops, but the land seemed indifferent to human effort. Morning light revealed broken fences, toppled timber, and washed out paths, reminding them that nature's power could undo months of labor in a single night. Hunters ventured farther into the forest than ever before. Deer tracks led into dense thickets where shadows moved in ways the untrained eye could not predict. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves, set hearts racing. Wolves and wildcats prowled the edges of their settlements, their eyes glinting in the dawn and dusk, while snakes, some venomous, lurked among underbrush and fallen leaves. The settlers learned that survival demanded vigilance at all times, that carelessness could be fatal. Yet the forest also offered sustenance. Nuts, berries, edible roots, and fish, all gifts for those who knew where to look and how to harvest without exhausting resources. Interactions with native tribes became increasingly complex. The Croatoan remained their allies, guiding the settlers in hunting and foraging techniques, teaching them how to build fish weirs and store food safely, and instructing them in travel across rivers and through thick forests. Yet other tribes remained cautious, their motives unclear, and skirmishes occasionally erupted over hunting grounds or perceived slights. Every conversation, every exchange, required careful attention to language, gesture, and tone. White and other leaders emphasized diplomacy, knowing that a single misstep could provoke conflict that might destroy the fragile colony. Illness continued to take a toll. Fevers swept through families with alarming speed, and the limited remedies brought from England often failed. Mothers tended to sick children in cramped homes, their own strength waning from exhaustion. Adults cared for one another, sharing water, warmth, and meager food rations. The psychological strain was heavy. Fear of disease compounded fears of hunger and hostility. Yet the community endured, buoyed by hope, faith, and small victories, like the first successful harvest of beans and squash, or the capture of a deer that fed several families for days. Amid these challenges, new life appeared, providing both joy and distraction. Children were born, their cries echoing in the forest as reminders of continuity and purpose. Virginia Dare, now a toddler, represented more than the first English child in the New World. She embodied hope, innocence, and the promise that this land might one day sustain generations. Her presence lifted spirits and reinforced the settlers' resolve. Celebrations were modest, simple gatherings around firelight, with songs, prayers, and shared food, but they strengthened bonds and reminded the settlers of why they had endured so much hardship. Winter loomed again, darker and colder than the settlers had expected. The dense forest offered little protection from wind, and heavy rains turned paths to rivers of mud. Fires crackled in the small homes, but smoke and damp wood made warmth inconsistent. Food stores were meticulously rationed. Corn was dried and stored, salted meats preserved carefully, and hunting continued despite the dangers. Frost-bitten fingers, aching joints, and sleepless nights challenged even the strongest among them. Some settlers fell ill to cold or malnutrition, and mourning became a constant companion to labor. Despite these adversities, exploration continued. White led expeditions inland to assess the surrounding land for new settlements, hunting grounds, and potential threats. Small groups traveled along rivers, mapping the terrain, observing wildlife, and recording the locations of friendly and hostile tribes. The lessons of the forest were learned quickly. Hidden dangers, sudden storms, poisonous plants, and treacherous footing. Each expedition was a balance between discovery and survival, and every journey returned the settlers with vital knowledge about the land they hoped to call home. Tensions occasionally flared within the colony itself. Disagreements over resource allocation, leadership decisions, and treatment of native allies threatened to undermine unity. White's steady hand, calm reasoning, and insistence on fairness prevented most disputes from escalating. But the psychological toll of long isolation, constant labor, and uncertainty of reinforcements from England weighed heavily on every member of the colony. Letters and reports had promised aid, yet months turned to years without ships appearing, forcing settlers to rely solely on their ingenuity, cooperation, and the fragile trust they had built with local tribes. One spring, a particularly violent storm struck the island. Fierce winds tore at roofs, uprooted trees, and flooded fields. Crops were destroyed, shelters damaged, and stored food was partially lost. The colonists labored day and night to repair damage, salvage what they could, and ensure survival. During the storm, some settlers were injured, and temporary shelters became homes for those displaced. The community's resilience was tested, and the bonds between families and allies deepened, forged in shared adversity. Amidst the storm's aftermath, the settlers continued to adapt native methods of survival. They constructed rudimentary fish weirs in rivers, created small raised platforms to store food away from flooding, and learned to use natural features of the land for protection against wind and rain. The Croatoan guided them in constructing temporary shelters that could be moved if conditions worsened. Cultural exchange deepened, with some settlers adopting tribal clothing for warmth and mobility, while children learned basic words and customs of the native people. These adaptations improved survival rates, yet the unknown always lingered, a reminder that the forest and the island were untamed, their moods unpredictable. Sickness and death continued to shadow the colony. Children were especially vulnerable to fever and infection, and the loss of even a single family member had profound emotional effects. Births, though joyous, were fraught with risk. Midwives improvised using knowledge from England and lessons from native women, blending methods in hopes of successful delivery. The survival of each child, each family, reinforced the delicate balance between hope and despair that defined life on Roanoke. By mid-year, subtle signs suggested that some settlers considered relocating closer to Croatoan villages, seeking security, shared resources, and knowledge from their allies. Explorations inland revealed potential sites for safer settlement, fertile land for crops, and strategic locations near rivers and inlets. These journeys carried risks, unknown tribes, treacherous terrain, and wildlife. But the necessity for safety and sustenance outweighed fear. Each trip returned with valuable intelligence. Maps of waterways, observations of animal migration, and a better understanding of which areas could sustain life. The psychological impact of isolation was ever present. Long days of labor, the constant threat of storms, and the unknown fate of reinforcements from England weighed on minds and spirits. Settlers relied heavily on storytelling, religious observance, and communal work to maintain morale. Nights were filled with quiet reflection, whispered conversations, and prayers for protection and guidance. The wind through the trees and the lap of waves along the shore became companions, familiar yet untrustworthy, as if the island itself were alive, observing their efforts. Life continued with a mixture of fear, hope, and adaptation. Children grew stronger, learning the ways of the land. Families worked in harmony to ensure survival, blending English traditions with native guidance. Each day reinforced the delicate balance required to endure: respect for nature, careful diplomacy with tribes, meticulous care of resources, and resilience in the face of hardship. Yet, beneath every routine was the persistent question: would they ever see England again? Would their colony survive the coming years? By the close of this year, the settlers had established a fragile, yet functioning society. Crops had been planted and harvested, shelters reinforced, children educated in both English and native ways, and alliances maintained with friendly tribes. Yet the mystery of the future lingered. Letters from England promised aid, but the political turmoil of Europe and war with Spain delayed every hope of reinforcement. The island held its secrets close, and each day brought both survival and suspense. As the colonists balanced the tangible needs of food, water, and shelter against the intangible threats of isolation, uncertainty, and the unknown wilderness that surrounded them. As the third year on Roanoke Island began, the settlers had grown more familiar with both the land and its hidden dangers. Yet familiarity did not lessen the challenges they faced. Spring arrived with a deceptive warmth. Rainstorms soaked the island without warning, washing away carefully tended crops and turning paths into treacherous quagmires. The men labored to reinforce shelters and fences, but the sheer unpredictability of weather reminded them that the island could never be fully tamed. They learned to respect the cycles of nature, reading the clouds, the wind, and the movement of birds as guides to impending storms. Each decision carried weight. Failure to observe could result in loss of food, property, or even life. Hunting parties ventured farther inland than ever before, driven by the need for meat and furs. Deer, elk, and smaller mammals offered sustenance, but the forest was fraught with hazards. Poisonous snakes, venomous insects, and predators, such as wolves and panthers, prowled the dense underbrush. Men carried spears and bows, but often it was stealth and patience, rather than brute force, that ensured survival. Young boys accompanied fathers on these expeditions, learning tracking, patience, and the ways of the forest that would define their coming of age. They observed the subtle signs: broken branches, tracks in mud, the movement of birds overhead, all clues in the constant game of survival. Meanwhile, tensions within the colony occasionally flared. Scarcity of food, disputes over authority, and the stress of long isolation led to arguments, though John White's steady hand and sense of fairness mitigated many conflicts. He reminded settlers that unity was their greatest defense against the untamed wilderness, disease, and uncertainty. Families pulled together, sharing labor and provisions, understanding that survival required cooperation rather than competition. The settlers' interactions with native tribes became increasingly nuanced. The Croatoan remained trusted allies, guiding them in food preservation, hunting techniques, and travel through dense forests. Other tribes observed cautiously, occasionally displaying hostility. Misunderstandings were inevitable. What one group considered a gift or a friendly gesture might be misinterpreted as insult or encroachment. Every exchange was delicate, requiring patience, respect, and careful observation. Winter approached with a relentless chill. Temperatures dropped lower than expected, frost biting unprepared fingers and toes. Shelters, though reinforced, offered limited protection from the wind and dampness. Fires burned constantly, consuming precious wood, while smoke clogged small spaces, stinging eyes and lungs. Food reserves were stretched thin. Corn, beans, and squash were rationed carefully, while fishing continued in freezing waters, often under hazardous conditions. Some settlers fell ill from cold and malnutrition, compounding the colony's fragility. Childbirth continued to shape the community. Women labored in crude shelters, assisted by midwives who combined knowledge from England with practices learned from native women. The birth of each child was both joyous and perilous, representing continuity and hope in a world filled with uncertainty. Families celebrated quietly, gathering around fires to share small portions of food, sing, and pray for protection. Yet joy was always tempered by fear. Infant mortality was high, and sickness could strike at any moment. Disease outbreaks further tested the colony's resilience. Fever, dysentery, and respiratory illnesses spread rapidly in cramped living conditions. Parents tended the sick with improvised remedies, using herbs from the forest or traditional methods from England. Some settlers succumbed, leaving families grief-stricken yet forced to continue labor for the survival of others. The constant presence of death, juxtaposed with new life, created a rhythm of hope and despair, reinforcing the precariousness of existence on the island. Exploration inland revealed both opportunity and danger. Settlers mapped rivers, forests, and potential settlement areas, noting fertile soil, freshwater sources, and defensive positions. Encounters with other tribes provided insight into social structures, trade networks, and territorial boundaries. Some interactions were friendly, offering guidance, food, and trade. Others were hostile, requiring careful negotiation or avoidance. White documented each journey meticulously, creating maps and sketches that recorded both the land and the people inhabiting it. These records would become invaluable to historians, though they could never fully convey the tension, fear, and perseverance of life on Roanoke. The settlers also began experimenting with hybrid agricultural methods, combining English techniques with native knowledge. They observed planting patterns, crop rotations, and forest clearing methods, adjusting practices to suit soil conditions and weather patterns. These adaptations improved yields marginally, yet no amount of ingenuity could eliminate the constant threat of storms, flooding, or drought. Each season required careful planning, labor, and vigilance. The colony faced internal challenges beyond food and labor. Isolation, fear, and the psychological toll of constant uncertainty affected mental well-being. Settlers relied on storytelling, prayer, communal work, and observation of nature to maintain morale. Nights were long and quiet, punctuated by distant animal calls, the rustle of leaves, and the ever-present wind through the trees. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness, feeding anxieties while teaching attentiveness to potential threats. One particularly harsh winter brought both lessons and tragedy. A violent snowstorm struck without warning, damaging shelters and flooding low-lying fields. Fires were difficult to maintain, and several settlers fell ill from exposure. Families huddled together for warmth, improvising insulation from branches, leaves, and cloth. Crops buried under snow were destroyed, and hunting became treacherous. These hardships tested every aspect of survival: resourcefulness, cooperation, and endurance. Yet the colony persisted, learning from each setback, adapting methods, and deepening bonds between families and allies. Amid these struggles, subtle signs of change appeared. Some settlers began relocating closer to native villages for protection and shared resources. Exploratory parties discovered inland sites with fertile land, abundant wildlife, and freshwater streams. These locations offered potential for long-term habitation, but required careful negotiation with tribes whose territories were already established. Each decision carried weight, balancing the promise of safety and resources against potential conflict and unknown dangers. The psychological dimension of survival became increasingly apparent. Fear of the unknown, isolation from England, and uncertainty about the future weighed heavily on the settlers' minds. They learned to cope through routine, ritual, and reliance on community. Work, study, and observation became both a necessity and a form of mental grounding. Children learned early the balance of hope and caution, absorbing the lessons of survival from parents, elders, and the land itself. As the third year drew to a close, the settlers had achieved a fragile stability. Crops, shelters, and hunting methods were more reliable. Alliances with the Croatoan and other friendly tribes strengthened. Yet the specter of the unknown loomed large. Europe remained distant, supplies uncertain, and the island's forests and rivers held both hidden riches and dangers. The settlers understood that survival was not guaranteed, only earned through constant vigilance, adaptability, and careful management of resources and relationships. Whispers of change and movement began circulating quietly within the colony. Some settlers expressed interest in moving inland permanently, guided by knowledge from native allies. Others debated whether to remain near the coast in hopes of encountering returning ships from England. John White, as both leader and observer, documented these discussions, weighing the risks and benefits of each potential decision. Every choice carried profound consequences, not only for immediate survival, but for the legacy of the colony and the lives of those yet unborn. Year ended with mixed emotions, triumphs in adaptation and survival, sorrow for lives lost, hope for children born, and apprehension about the unknown. The colony had endured storms, illness, scarcity, and conflict, yet persisted. Each day's survival reinforced their determination, but the persistent absence of aid from England weighed heavily. The island's mysteries remained, as did the unanswered question: would this colony endure, or would it become another lost chapter in the New World's history? By the beginning of the fourth year, the settlers of Roanoke Island had reached a fragile equilibrium, yet the shadow of uncertainty never left them. Supplies from England were still absent, and the community had grown wary of relying solely on hope. John White, burdened by responsibility, began preparations to return to England in order to gather reinforcements and essential provisions. His departure was fraught with complexity. Families relied on his leadership. The colony depended on his knowledge, and leaving risked exposing the settlement to both internal and external dangers. White's decision was met with mixed emotions. Some colonists understood the necessity and supported him, while others feared abandonment. Trust and loyalty were tested. He carefully organized his departure, ensuring that maps, sketches, and instructions were left behind for those who would remain. Families fortified shelters, stored crops, and coordinated with friendly native allies to secure protection in his absence. Every preparation was meticulous, as the colony understood that any oversight could result in catastrophe. The journey back to England was perilous. Navigating treacherous waters, unpredictable storms, and the ever-present threat of piracy, White's mission demanded both courage and endurance. Weeks at sea tested physical limits, yet his mind remained focused on the colony's survival. Upon arrival, he pleaded with the crown and private investors for support, emphasizing the precarious state of the settlers and the urgent need for supplies, reinforcements, and skilled labor. Back on Roanoke Island, the settlers faced new challenges. Without White's leadership, decision-making fell to a council of remaining adults. Daily life continued under the constant pressure of survival, maintaining shelters, tending crops, hunting, and navigating the complex relationships with neighboring tribes. Communication with the Croatoan proved essential. They provided knowledge of local flora and fauna, warned of approaching weather, and offered guidance for safe travel inland. Yet, despite cooperation, subtle signs hinted that the island itself might be shifting against the colonists. Trees uprooted, river paths altered, and unexpected wildlife movements stirred unease. Strange occurrences began to unsettle the settlement. Tools disappeared, only to be found in unusual locations. Footprints that did not belong to colonists or familiar native allies appeared near food stores. At night, whispers carried on the wind seemed almost human, though no person was present. Children reported glimpses of figures in the forest, fleeting shadows that vanished before they could be fully observed. Some settlers dismissed these signs as imagination or fear, while others felt an inexplicable sense of foreboding, a tension that would grow with each passing month. The coming of another harsh winter magnified every hardship. Fires were difficult to maintain, crops frozen or destroyed left rations perilously low. Illness spread more aggressively than ever, claiming lives despite careful attention. Families huddled together for warmth, using every available resource to survive. Yet, even as despair threatened, moments of resilience shone through. Successful hunts, preserved food, and the guidance of native allies helped sustain the fragile community. Each day was a delicate balance between hope and survival. Exploration became riskier and more urgent. Scouts traveled further inland, mapping resources, noting potential threats, and observing both familiar and hostile tribes. Reports of strange phenomena, vanishing animals, sudden shifts in the weather, and unfamiliar symbols carved into trees began to surface. These signs, subtle at first, accumulated into a pervasive sense of unease. Was the land merely unpredictable, or was something more mysterious influencing events? The settlers debated these questions in whispers, careful not to incite panic, while acknowledging that something was undeniably amiss. Spring brought a fleeting reprieve. Crops planted in sheltered areas survived, hunting yielded food, and temporary shelters provided modest comfort. Yet the colony's fragility remained. Each family understood that survival depended on vigilance, cooperation, and adaptation. Relationships with the Croatoan deepened, though even allies could not prevent the creeping tension that seemed to settle over the island like a thick fog. John White's absence stretched on, and the colony felt the psychological weight of isolation. Morale fluctuated with the weather, the success of crops, and the outcome of exploratory missions. The settlers relied on rituals, communal work, and storytelling to maintain cohesion. At night, around flickering fires, they whispered fears of disappearance, of being swallowed by the forest or forgotten by the crown. Every shadow, every distant noise was scrutinized. The unknown pressed heavily upon their minds. By the second year of White's absence, subtle but alarming changes became apparent. Fences were found dismantled, food stores missing or displaced, and signs of hurried movement suggested that some members had traveled or been removed without explanation. Children and women occasionally vanished briefly, reappearing without clarity on their whereabouts. The colony's trust wavered. Some suspected hostile tribes. Others imagined supernatural causes. Anxiety became a constant companion, shaping decisions, interactions, and the rhythm of daily life. Despite these mounting pressures, the settlers attempted to maintain routines. Crop rotation, fishing, hunting, and communal labor continued, though with an underlying tension. The Croatoan advised caution, warning of disturbances in nearby forests and unusual patterns in animal behavior. Colonists recorded these observations meticulously, aware that understanding the land might mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. Summer arrived with strange anomalies. Birds flew in unusual patterns, and rivers shifted unexpectedly. Small fires appeared near the edges of the forest, unexplained by natural causes. Colonists found objects moved or altered, their sense of security eroded. Even the most rational adults began to question whether their isolation had triggered hallucination, or whether something truly inexplicable was at work. Each day, the line between reality and fear blurred further. By late summer, the disappearance of several colonists sparked alarm. Investigations revealed no clear traces, only subtle clues: a carved symbol in a tree, footprints leading into dense forest and vanishing, and supplies rearranged or missing. The pattern suggested movement, but direction and purpose remained enigmatic. Panic was tempered by pragmatism. Survival still demanded attention to crops, hunting, and shelter. Yet the psychological strain was palpable. Whispers of fear circulated, affecting sleep, focus, and cooperation. Autumn arrived with colder winds and the first hints of frost. The settlers labored tirelessly to prepare for winter, but the cumulative effect of disease, scarcity, and mysterious disappearances made the work arduous. Families gathered around fires at night, recounting tales of strange sightings and whispered warnings from the forest. Adults debated whether to move closer to the Croatoan for safety, while children, increasingly aware of the tension, clung to parents, sensing unspoken danger. As winter deepened, the colony faced its greatest test. Storms lashed the island, rivers overflowed, and shelters were damaged. Food stores were low, illness widespread, and trust within the colony strained to breaking. Signs of vanished settlers became more frequent. Tools, clothing, and personal items were found abandoned, hinting at hurried movement or forced disappearance. The colony's cohesion faltered as fear of the unknown spread. Each member was forced to weigh caution against necessity, survival against curiosity. In the final months, the remaining settlers experienced a series of unexplainable events. Trees bearing strange carvings, footprints that appeared and vanished without trace, and the sudden absence of familiar wildlife created an atmosphere of mounting dread. Reports from scouts and children were dismissed by some as imagination, yet the consistency and frequency of these occurrences suggested something beyond coincidence. Panic, caution, and despair intertwined, shaping behavior and decision-making. When John White finally returned from England with supplies and reinforcements, he found the settlement strangely altered. Structures were in disarray, crops partially cultivated, and the remaining colonists visibly exhausted and wary. Crucially, many members of the colony had vanished, leaving behind only subtle signs. A single word carved into a post, Croatoan, the only clue to their fate. Families were missing, children absent, and the forest seemed to hold its breath, indifferent to human suffering. White's shock was profound. Despite detailed records, meticulous preparation, and loyal guidance, the colony had disappeared as if swallowed by the land itself. He searched nearby islands and villages, consulted with native allies, and followed every lead available. Yet the mystery persisted. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no definitive trail. Only whispers, shadows, and the enigmatic symbol that would haunt historians, explorers, and dreamers for centuries. The fate of Roanoke Island's settlers became one of America's oldest and most enduring mysteries. A story that blends hope, ambition, survival, and the profound unknown. As the sun set over the island, the waves lapped silently against the shore. The forest held its secrets tight. The wind carried whispers of lives once lived, and the memory of the lost colony remained etched into the soil, the trees, and the ocean beyond. The settlers' dreams of a new beginning had vanished almost entirely, leaving only questions, legends, and the enduring, haunting word, Croatoan. The Atlantic shimmered under the midday sun as ships sailed toward the New World once more, carrying hopes, fears, and a burden of unanswered questions. England had not forgotten Roanoke. Whispers of the lost colony had grown louder over the years. Rumors, half-truths, and tales of vanished families echoed through halls of government, taverns, and private studies alike. Explorers and investors debated whether to send aid, reclaim the colony, or consider the venture a tragic failure. Yet ambition and curiosity pushed men and women onward. The promise of land, resources, and fame was too great to ignore. John White, aged and weary from his prior journey, returned to London only to find the political climate more turbulent than ever. England was embroiled in conflict with Spain. Naval raids disrupted trade, and attention to distant colonies was inconsistent at best. He lobbied persistently for ships, supplies, and crews capable of enduring the harsh conditions of the Atlantic and the uncertainties of the New World. Letters, reports, and meticulous sketches chronicled every detail of the island, the remaining settlers, and the mysterious disappearances. Yet bureaucracy moved slowly, and months passed before any substantial expedition could be organized. Meanwhile, word of Roanoke reached the ears of other European powers. Spain, France, and even Dutch merchants took interest. Maps circulated, some accurate, others speculative, showing the New World's eastern coast dotted with settlements, islands, and uncharted forests. Rumors of vanished English settlers intrigued and alarmed alike. For Spain, it was a cautionary tale of ambition and hubris. For private investors, a tantalizing opportunity to succeed where others had faltered. By the summer of the following year, a new expedition was finally underway. Ships, loaded with supplies, reinforcements, and skilled laborers, crossed the Atlantic, their crews acutely aware that they were sailing into both history and mystery. On board, tales of the previous colony's fate dominated conversation. Some dismissed the stories as exaggeration. Others feared that the island itself held a supernatural force. Regardless, everyone understood that the journey was fraught with risk. Yet the potential for glory and discovery outweighed fear. Upon reaching the vicinity of Roanoke, the explorers were struck by the island's unchanged appearance. Dense forests stretched to the horizon, rivers curved like serpents through the land, and the coastline appeared deceptively serene. Yet, subtle signs suggested prior habitation, abandoned tools, partially repaired shelters, and traces of garden plots overtaken by wild growth. The investigators found no immediate presence of settlers, alive or dead, only the whisper of the wind through the trees, and the lapping of waves against the shore greeted them. As they ventured inland, the new arrivals discovered further clues: scattered clothing, fragments of pottery, and remnants of meals left as if the inhabitants had vanished suddenly. Trees bore unfamiliar carvings, some in English letters, some in symbols that puzzled even the most experienced observers. The word Croatoan appeared again, carved boldly into a post, echoing the earlier disappearance. These signs inspired both hope and fear. Perhaps some settlers had integrated with local tribes, or perhaps a more sinister fate awaited them. Interactions with native tribes provided partial answers. Some Croatoan and neighboring Algonquian people offered guidance and shared knowledge of European settlers they had encountered. Stories hinted that some members of the lost colony had traveled inland or joined friendly tribes, adopting local customs and marrying into communities. Yet other accounts were ominous: unexplained vanishings, conflicts, and encounters with strangers who never returned. The Europeans realized that while the land offered refuge and sustenance, it also concealed dangers that could swallow even the strongest individuals. Exploration of surrounding islands and rivers revealed traces of activity: small clearings, crude shelters, and signs of temporary habitation. However, there were no definitive clues pointing to the full fate of the vanished settlers. Every hypothesis, migration, assimilation, death by disease, or conflict, remained speculative. The explorers meticulously recorded everything, aware that their findings might solve one of the oldest mysteries in English colonial history, or simply add layers of uncertainty. Over time, as months of exploration continued, patterns emerged. Some settlers seemed to have dispersed along the coast, integrating with friendly tribes for survival. Others may have perished due to starvation, disease, or accidents in the wilderness. The truth remained elusive, obscured by time, natural reclamation of the land, and the complex dynamics between English settlers and native peoples. Even today, archaeologists and historians struggle to untangle the evidence, piecing together fragments from a puzzle that remains fundamentally incomplete. The legacy of Roanoke extended beyond the immediate mystery. The disappearance shaped English colonial policy, inspiring caution, influencing settlement strategies, and fueling ambition. Subsequent colonies, like Jamestown, were planned with stricter fortifications, better supplies, and more careful attention to relations with native tribes. Roanoke became a cautionary tale, a story repeated in chronicles, letters, and oral histories, a tale of hope, courage, hubris, and the unknowable wilderness. Even as centuries passed, the island retained its enigmatic allure. Archaeological digs unearthed remnants of structures, tools, and daily life, yet definitive answers remained out of reach. DNA studies, oral histories, and historical records suggested possible integration of Roanoke descendants into native communities, yet gaps and ambiguities persisted. The story of the colony became embedded in the cultural memory, inspiring legends, literature, and endless speculation. Roanoke's story also influenced American imagination, casting a shadow over the perception of the New World. It served as a stark reminder that ambition and preparation could falter against nature, uncertainty, and unforeseen circumstances. The mystery captivated explorers, writers, historians, and the public alike, becoming a touchstone for understanding the fragility of human endeavor in the face of the unknown. Even today, the word Croatoan endures, etched into collective consciousness as a symbol of disappearance, mystery, and the enduring questions that define America's early colonial history. Visitors to the region, researchers and dreamers alike, feel a quiet tension when they step onto the shores of Roanoke Island, sensing both the beauty and danger, the promise and peril of a place that witnessed human hope rise and vanish without trace. Years after the initial disappearance, Roanoke Island continued to evoke both curiosity and apprehension among Europeans. Ships arrived intermittently, carrying explorers, settlers, and officials eager to uncover the truth. Each expedition approached with cautious optimism, armed with maps, supplies, and instructions from previous reports. The landscape appeared unchanged, yet it whispered secrets to those who observed closely, traces of habitation, signs of life interrupted and subtle evidence of survival and adaptation. Local native tribes became central to these investigations. The Croatoan, once steadfast allies to the original colony, offered guidance and insight. They recounted encounters with English settlers who had integrated into their communities, marrying into tribes, adopting customs, and contributing to shared labor. Other tribes, less accommodating, expressed caution and sometimes hostility toward newcomers, their territory and sovereignty not to be infringed upon lightly. Interpreters and guides facilitated communication, but the nuances of culture, language, and custom often complicated understanding. Archaeological evidence began to accumulate. Foundations of crude homes, fragments of pottery, remnants of tools, and disturbed soil hinted at sudden movement or abandonment. Some areas suggested temporary camps, possibly indicating that groups of settlers had relocated to different parts of the island or adjacent islands. These discoveries reinforced theories that the colony had not been wiped out entirely, but had dispersed, seeking refuge among familiar or friendly native communities. Yet the absence of definitive remains left the mystery unresolved. European observers noted that the island's geography itself contributed to both survival and peril. Rivers and inlets provided water and food, but also acted as natural barriers or traps. Dense forests offered concealment and resources, but could disorient and separate groups. Storms, unpredictable in timing and intensity, destroyed crops and shelters, reminding newcomers that the island's environment was both nurturing and unforgiving. These conditions demanded adaptability, knowledge, and cooperation, qualities that the original colonists had cultivated, but that subsequent arrivals had to relearn. The legacy of Roanoke shaped settlement strategies in the New World. English authorities became more meticulous in provisioning colonies, fortifying structures, and negotiating with native tribes. Roanoke's failure and mysterious disappearance served as a cautionary tale that tempered ambition with pragmatism. Colonists understood that survival depended not only on courage and skill, but also on careful planning, diplomacy, and respect for the environment. Oral histories among native tribes preserved fragments of the settlers' experiences. Tales recounted English men, women, and children integrating into communities, learning local customs, and sometimes vanishing further inland. Some stories hinted at conflict with hostile groups, accidents, or disease outbreaks. Other narratives suggested that settlers were absorbed into tribal life, their descendants living quietly among native populations. These accounts, while fragmented and filtered through generations, offered invaluable insight into the dynamics of cultural exchange, adaptation, and survival. European writings from the period reflected both fascination and fear. Chronicles, letters, and official reports described the island as enigmatic and dangerous, emphasizing both the audacity of colonists and the mysteries they faced. Authors speculated on the role of supernatural forces, unknown tribes, or environmental hazards, blending observation with imagination. These accounts fueled legends, inspiring future explorers and shaping the collective perception of the New World as a place of opportunity, danger, and profound uncertainty. Scientific and historical inquiries in later centuries continued to explore the fate of Roanoke settlers. Archaeologists uncovered structural remains, tools, and domestic artifacts that hinted at settlement patterns, resource management, and adaptation strategies. Anthropologists examined native oral histories, tracing potential lines of descent and cultural integration. Linguists studied preserved vocabulary and stories, seeking connections between English settlers and indigenous communities. Genetic studies, though limited, suggested possible integration of Roanoke descendants into regional populations, offering tantalizing but inconclusive evidence of survival and assimilation. The story of Roanoke also influenced the broader understanding of colonial dynamics. The disappearance highlighted the vulnerability of isolated settlements, the importance of alliances with native communities, and the necessity of sustainable resource management. Scholars noted that the colony's challenges were not solely the result of environmental hazards, but also of social, logistical, and psychological factors. Isolation, fear, scarcity, and miscommunication all contributed to the precarious existence of the settlers, illustrating the complex interplay between humans and their environment. Across generations, Roanoke became emblematic of human ambition, endurance, and mystery. Writers, historians, and storytellers drew inspiration from the island's enigmatic past, crafting narratives that blended fact, conjecture, and imagination. Children learned of the lost colony as part of cultural lore, while adults debated theories, examined evidence, and speculated on the fates of individuals whose lives had vanished into history. The persistence of the mystery underscored the limits of knowledge, the power of environment, and the enduring questions about human resilience and adaptation. Explorers revisiting Roanoke in subsequent centuries observed subtle traces of prior habitation. Foundations of homes, garden remnants, and signs of controlled fires suggested deliberate activity rather than chaotic disappearance. Some areas revealed signs of sudden evacuation, implying that the settlers left intentionally, possibly guided by alliances, survival strategy, or necessity. These clues offered tantalizing possibilities. Perhaps some families survived entirely, their descendants blending into regional populations, or perhaps natural disasters and disease forced dispersal and eventual disappearance. Colonial records, letters, and reports reinforced the intrigue. English officials documented failed resupply missions, encounters with native guides, and observations of partially abandoned settlements. Some chroniclers speculated on the role of hostile tribes, others on disease or environmental hazards. The multiplicity of accounts, sometimes contradictory, contributed to the enduring fascination with Roanoke. Scholars continue to debate, analyze, and reinterpret these sources, highlighting the layered complexity of historical reconstruction and the challenges of understanding events from limited evidence. The island's environment itself remained a compelling character in the narrative. Dense forests, shifting rivers, unpredictable weather, and abundant, but sometimes dangerous wildlife created a setting of both opportunity and peril. Survival required intimate knowledge of the land, adaptability, and constant vigilance. The settlers' successes and failures illuminated the delicate balance between human ingenuity and natural forces, providing enduring lessons about resilience, strategy, and respect for the environment. By the modern era, Roanoke had become a symbol of historical mystery, national imagination, and cultural reflection. Archaeological excavations, historical research, and public interest converged, creating a narrative that bridged centuries. The vanished colony inspired books, films, scholarly works, and public discourse, maintaining relevance through its blend of hope, tragedy, and enigma. The word Croatoan remained emblematic, haunting both scholarship and storytelling, a reminder of lives interrupted and questions left unanswered. Yet, despite centuries of investigation, Roanoke's story continues to resist definitive conclusion. Each discovery, whether an artifact, a map notation, or an oral tradition, adds context, but also complexity. The interplay of human endeavor, environmental challenge, cultural integration, and sheer chance created a historical episode that defies simple explanation. For historians, explorers, and enthusiasts alike, the lost colony remains a mirror reflecting both the limits of knowledge and the enduring human fascination with the unknown. Decades after the initial disappearance, the story of Roanoke Island had woven itself into both European and native consciousness. England's colonial ambitions persisted, yet Roanoke remained a cautionary tale, a haunting example of ambition confronted by uncertainty. Travelers, officials, and settlers approached the eastern shores of the New World with heightened vigilance, carrying memories of vanished settlers, mysterious symbols, and accounts of survival and loss. Reports of descendants of Roanoke settlers began to surface intermittently. Native tribes recounted stories of individuals with distinctly English features, familiar language patterns, or customs that suggested European origin. Some children raised in tribal villages were said to possess knowledge of English words and practices unknown to neighboring communities. These accounts, fragmented and filtered through generations, tantalized scholars, hinting at the possibility that some members of the lost colony had survived, integrated, and perpetuated their lineage quietly within native society. European officials remained intrigued. Letters from explorers detailed these oral histories, while maps were updated with notes of settlements, paths, and river crossings. England, distracted by continental conflicts and the struggle for naval dominance against Spain, often relegated Roanoke to a secondary concern. Yet, private investors and explorers recognized the allure of the unknown. Tales of survival, hidden settlements, and potential riches maintained a persistent pull. Expeditions were organized intermittently, though few succeeded in producing definitive answers. Archaeologists' centuries later uncovered artifacts that supported these oral histories. Small fragments of English-made pottery, metal tools, and personal items were found far inland, in areas corresponding to Croatoan settlements. Patterns of land use, small clearings, modified forest paths, and rudimentary irrigation suggested intentional habitation rather than transient encampments. Each artifact reinforced the possibility that some settlers had moved deliberately, creating pockets of adaptation and integration within a complex landscape. The European political context added another layer of complexity. England, embroiled in conflicts with Spain and later with France, faced logistical and financial constraints in supporting distant colonies. Naval expeditions were fraught with danger. Storms, piracy, and disease threatened every voyage. These external pressures shaped the response to Roanoke, delaying resupply missions and limiting oversight. The combination of geopolitical distraction and natural hazards created a historical vacuum in which the mystery of the lost colony could deepen and persist. Cultural influence spread alongside survival. English settlers integrated into native communities brought not only labor and skill, but also elements of language, farming techniques, and craftsmanship. Over generations, these contributions merged with local practices, creating hybrid customs. Oral traditions preserved both subtle European knowledge and distinctly English legends, intertwining with native storytelling and shaping regional identity in ways that modern historians can only partially reconstruct. Legends surrounding Roanoke multiplied over time. Tales of ghostly figures, sudden disappearances, and unexplained phenomena became intertwined with the island's historical reality. Some stories suggested that settlers had fled inland to escape perceived threats or natural disasters, while others posited mysterious forces at work in the forest, rivers, and skies. Writers, storytellers, and later historians were captivated, blending fact, conjecture, and imagination in narratives that endure even today. The word Croatoan remained central, a symbol, a clue, and a riddle that defied complete understanding. Explorers and scholars debated whether the colony's disappearance was sudden or gradual. Archaeological surveys indicated both possibilities. Signs of hastily abandoned sites, disrupted tool caches, and scattered personal effects suggested abrupt movement. Yet patterns of inland artifacts and integration hinted at a more measured dispersal. Disease, environmental hazards, social stress, and strategic relocation likely all played a role. The truth, obscured by time and natural reclamation, continues to challenge historical interpretation. As the New World continued to develop, the legacy of Roanoke influenced subsequent settlements. Jamestown, Plymouth, and other colonies learned from its example, stockpiling provisions, forging stronger alliances with native populations, and reinforcing structures against both natural and human threats. Roanoke's story informed policy, planning, and colonial psychology, reminding settlers that ambition must be tempered with pragmatism and respect for the land. Oral traditions in native communities preserved nuanced accounts of the lost colony. Stories of European children growing up within tribes, of families adopting native customs, and of occasional return visits to coastal areas provided fragments of continuity. Anthropologists and historians later examined these accounts, seeking links between English ancestry and regional tribal populations, while definitive genealogical proof remained elusive. The persistence of narrative across generations suggested that some members of the colony had indeed survived in hidden or integrated forms. Exploration and investigation continued into the modern era. Archaeologists utilized new technologies, ground-penetrating radar, isotope analysis, and remote sensing to locate remnants of structures, tools, and other material culture. Findings confirmed patterns of habitation consistent with both English and native presence. Environmental analysis showed that shifting rivers, soil fertility, and forest regrowth could account for the disappearance of certain traces, while human adaptation strategies explained survival and movement inland. These discoveries deepened the understanding of colonial life, survival strategies, and interaction between European settlers and native communities. The mystery of Roanoke continues to resonate culturally. Films, literature, and scholarly studies explore the tension between hope, human ambition, and the unknown. The lost colony serves as both historical lesson and symbol, a narrative of courage and vulnerability, innovation and risk, survival and disappearance. The unresolved nature of the story fuels imagination, inviting speculation about hidden descendants, undiscovered settlements, and untold stories preserved in the land and in memory. Historians note that the endurance of Roanoke's mystery illustrates broader themes of colonial experience: the fragility of human endeavor, the challenge of cultural integration, the unpredictability of environment, and the enduring power of legend. The intersection of historical evidence, oral history, and imagination creates a rich tapestry in which both fact and conjecture coexist, reflecting the complexity of human history and the limits of knowledge. Even today, visits to Roanoke Island provoke reflection. Archaeological parks, museums, and interpretive centers educate visitors on the colony's history, the hardships faced by settlers, and the enduring enigma of their disappearance. Signs, reconstructed homes, and preserved artifacts offer tangible connections to the past. Yet the ultimate fate of many individuals remains elusive. The word Croatoan, etched into collective memory, continues to inspire curiosity, study, and cultural expression, reminding generations of the tension between discovery and mystery, survival and loss. The ongoing fascination with Roanoke underscores the enduring human desire to understand, interpret, and connect with the past. Each generation of historians, explorers, and storytellers adds perspective, analysis, and imagination. Yet the core mystery remains intact. Scholars debate causes, disease, assimilation, conflict, environmental hazards, while popular culture celebrates the legend, blending historical detail with narrative suspense. The interplay of fact and conjecture ensures that Roanoke will never be fully understood, preserving its place as one of America's most compelling historical enigmas. In the end, Roanoke Island embodies the intersection of history, human ambition, and the natural world. It demonstrates the resilience and vulnerability of settlers, the complexity of cultural interaction, and the profound challenges of survival in an unfamiliar environment. Its legacy persists in historical scholarship, cultural memory, and collective imagination, ensuring that the lost colony continues to captivate minds, provoke inquiry, and evoke the haunting question that has endured for centuries. What truly became of those who vanished, leaving behind only whispers, artifacts, and the enigmatic word Croatoan? By the late 17th and 18th centuries, Roanoke Island had solidified its place as both a historical landmark and a symbol of enduring mystery. Explorers revisiting the coast recorded traces of habitation and remnants of colonial attempts, though these were often sporadic and inconclusive. Maps indicated rivers, islands, and potential inland routes, but the true paths taken by the vanished settlers remained elusive. Scholars debated, historians speculated, and folklore continued to flourish. The colony had become a lens through which both the challenges of early settlement and the power of legend could be understood. European powers maintained intermittent interest in the region, though shifting political priorities and the expansion of settlements elsewhere often relegated Roanoke to a minor concern. Spain, England, and later France each observed the island's strategic and symbolic significance. Naval expeditions passed along the coast, some in search of resources, others hopping to document the fate of previous colonists. Reports described fertile land, abundant waterways, and dense forests, but also warned of unpredictable weather, treacherous terrain, and the unresolved mystery of English disappearance. These warnings influenced the planning and strategy of subsequent settlements along the Atlantic coast. Archaeological discoveries gradually illuminated aspects of life on the island. Foundations of homes, garden plots, and remnants of tools suggested organized and sustained habitation. Traces of English-style construction combined with native techniques, indicated cultural integration and adaptation. Artifacts, including pottery, metal implements, and personal items, revealed a degree of daily routine, domestic care, and continuity of life. Scholars pieced together a narrative that, while incomplete, reflected resilience, resourcefulness, and the ingenuity required to survive under constant uncertainty. Oral histories preserved among native communities offered complementary perspectives. Stories recounted English settlers assimilating, marrying into tribes, and contributing knowledge and skills while maintaining elements of their heritage. Children learned English words. Adults observed European farming techniques, and cultural exchange fostered hybrid communities. These narratives suggested that some individuals may have survived far beyond initial expectations, leaving legacies that persisted quietly within local populations. Despite centuries of study, many questions remained unresolved. Did some settlers travel inland to establish hidden enclaves? Were deaths caused primarily by disease, starvation, conflict, or environmental hazard? Could integration with native tribes explain the absence of bodies and definitive traces? Scholars considered each theory, weighing historical records, archaeological evidence, and oral traditions. The absence of certainty ensured that Roanoke remained an enduring historical puzzle, inspiring speculation and debate across generations. Cultural fascination with Roanoke expanded as literature, journalism, and later media explored the mystery. Stories blended historical detail with creative interpretation, portraying the lost colonists as explorers, victims, survivors, or even as figures caught in forces beyond human comprehension. The enigmatic word, Croatoan, became emblematic, appearing in novels, poems, films, and educational materials. Its endurance reflected the human desire to grasp, explain, and narrate events that defy complete understanding. By the 19th century, Roanoke's legend had reached international attention. Historical societies collected documents, letters, and artifacts, seeking to preserve evidence of early English colonization. Scholars compared records of Roanoke with subsequent settlements, noting lessons in logistics, diplomacy, and survival. The colony's fate was both cautionary and instructive, emphasizing the fragility of human enterprise and the need for careful planning and cultural awareness in unfamiliar territories. Modern archaeology and technology brought new dimensions to the investigation. Ground-penetrating radar, carbon dating, and DNA analysis provided insights into settlement patterns, diet, and possible descendant populations. Discoveries of English artifacts inland and within native settlements lent support to theories of integration and survival. Environmental studies revealed patterns of flooding, soil erosion, and vegetation growth that could obscure historical evidence, explaining why definitive traces of disappearance were elusive. Each scientific advancement brought clarity to some questions while deepening the intrigue surrounding unresolved mysteries. Roanoke's cultural impact extended beyond historical scholarship. Artists, writers, and filmmakers drew upon the narrative to explore themes of ambition, loss, survival, and the unknown. Educational programs highlighted the colony's history, teaching lessons in resilience, adaptation, and the consequences of human decision-making. The lost colony became an enduring metaphor, representing both the human drive to explore and the unpredictable consequences of venturing into the unknown. Legends and folklore preserved the story in unique ways. Ghostly sightings, unexplained phenomena, and anecdotal accounts of English native descendants continued to circulate, maintaining a living cultural presence for the story. Festivals, museum exhibits, and interpretive trails allowed visitors to engage with both the tangible and intangible heritage of Roanoke. The island's narrative transcended mere historical fact, embedding itself in the imagination of those seeking connection to America's early colonial past. The enduring mystery inspired both caution and ambition in later settlements. Colonists learned to balance exploration with preparation, to forge alliances with indigenous peoples, and to respect the unpredictability of environment and circumstance. Lessons from Roanoke informed strategies for Jamestown, Plymouth, and beyond, shaping the trajectory of colonial expansion and the collective understanding of what survival in the New World truly required. In contemporary historical discourse, Roanoke exemplifies the interplay of evidence, narrative, and interpretation. Scholars recognize that while many material clues exist, the human dimension, psychology, social dynamics, cultural integration adds complexity that pure artifact analysis cannot fully resolve. Oral histories, European records, and archaeological evidence together form a mosaic, one that highlights the limits of certainty and the enduring power of human storytelling. Today, Roanoke Island serves as both a historical site and a symbol. Its preserved areas, museum collections, and educational programs allow reflection on human ambition, resilience, and the consequences of venturing into the unknown. Visitors encounter reconstructed shelters, tools, and artifacts, while also engaging with the unresolved question that defines the island, the disappearance of the colony, and the legacy of the settlers whose lives were interrupted, but whose story endures. The word Croatoan, still etched in collective consciousness, continues to evoke curiosity, speculation, and a sense of awe. It serves as a reminder of human fragility, environmental challenge, cultural encounter, and the enduring mystery of history. Roanoke's story demonstrates that even in the face of careful planning, courage, and skill, uncertainty can prevail, leaving behind questions that span centuries and generations. Ultimately, Roanoke Island embodies the convergence of human aspiration, environmental unpredictability, and cultural complexity. Its legacy is multifaceted, a lesson in colonial strategy, a cautionary tale of ambition, a narrative of survival, and a mystery that transcends time. The lost colony persists in both historical record and imagination, bridging centuries of human inquiry and reflection. The enduring fascination with Roanoke reminds us that history is not only a chronicle of events, but also a tapestry of questions, interpretations, and stories that continue to shape understanding and inspire exploration. The island remains a place where the past is palpable and the unknown is ever present. Historians, archaeologists, educators, and curious visitors alike engage with its mysteries, examining artifacts, reconstructing narratives, and pondering the fates of those who vanished. Roanoke Island, in its quiet forests and lapping shores, stands as a monument to human ambition and the enduring allure of mystery, a story without full resolution, yet rich with lessons, imagination, and the eternal question: what became of the lost colony, and who truly carries its legacy into the present day? In the early 20th century, interest in Roanoke Island experienced a revival. Scholars, historians, and amateur explorers began systematic investigations, combing through archives, maps, and surviving correspondence to reconstruct the colony's story. Museums and historical societies collected artifacts, while archaeologists initiated field surveys to locate physical evidence of the lost settlement. The combination of historical research and modern archaeological technique marked a new era in the study of Roanoke, bringing scientific rigor to a story that had previously been dominated by legend and speculation. Explorations revealed the complexity of the island's environment. Dense forests, marshlands, and shifting river channels had reclaimed much of the land, obscuring structures and pathways used by the original settlers. Soil analysis indicated areas of cultivation, yet erosion and natural growth had erased much of the visual record. These discoveries highlighted both the ingenuity of the colonists and the relentless power of nature, emphasizing the delicate balance between human enterprise and environmental forces. Oral histories continued to provide crucial context. Interviews with descendants of native tribes, combined with historical records, revealed nuanced accounts of interactions with English settlers. Some recounted the integration of certain families into local communities, preserving elements of European culture while fully adopting tribal life. Others spoke of conflict and disease, suggesting that survival was never guaranteed. The convergence of oral tradition and material evidence allowed researchers to form more detailed hypotheses, though many questions remained unanswered. Modern archaeological techniques yielded significant finds. Excavations uncovered foundations, tools, and household artifacts, providing insight into daily life, social organization, and adaptive strategies. The presence of both European-style implements and native artifacts suggested a degree of cultural blending, supporting theories of assimilation and integration. carbon dating, and other scientific methods confirmed the age of these artifacts, aligning them with the period of the original colony's disappearance. Environmental studies also shed light on the challenges faced by settlers. Flood patterns, seasonal storms, and soil fertility affected crop yields, while disease vectors and animal interactions created additional hazards. Researchers noted that the settlers' success depended on their ability to interpret subtle environmental cues, manage resources efficiently, and maintain social cohesion. Failures in any of these domains could, and likely did, contribute to the colony's partial disappearance. Historians examined European documents for clues. Correspondence from John White, letters from investors, and official reports provided detailed observations, though gaps and ambiguities complicated interpretation. Some documents suggested internal disputes, logistical failures, and strained relationships with native allies, while others emphasized environmental hardships and the unpredictability of the Atlantic crossing. Taken together, these sources offered a complex portrait of a colony struggling to survive at the edge of the known world. Advances in genetics introduced a new avenue of inquiry. DNA analysis of regional populations sought potential descendants of Roanoke settlers, comparing genetic markers to known English lineages. Preliminary findings suggested possible integration into local native communities, though definitive conclusions were limited by both the passage of time and incomplete genealogical records. Nevertheless, the research provided tantalizing possibilities for understanding how the colony's legacy may have endured in hidden ways. Public fascination with Roanoke remained strong. Popular literature, documentaries, and fictional adaptations continued to explore the lost colony, blending historical research with creative interpretation. The word Croatoan became a symbol of the enduring mystery, representing both historical fact and imaginative speculation. Visitors to Roanoke Island engaged with the narrative through museums, reconstructed settlements, and interpretive trails, encountering tangible artifacts alongside the intangible allure of unresolved questions. By the 21st century, interdisciplinary research had further enriched understanding. Archaeologists, historians, environmental scientists, and anthropologists collaborated to reconstruct the colony's story. Findings indicated that the settlers' disappearance was likely the result of a combination of factors: environmental hardship, disease, resource scarcity, cultural integration, and possibly conflict with neighboring groups. No single cause could account for the entire event, underscoring the complexity of human survival in unfamiliar environments. Modern reconstructions emphasized both the daily life and the extraordinary circumstances faced by the settlers. Scholars examined tools, clothing, food sources, and shelters, highlighting strategies for adaptation and survival. Reconstructions demonstrated the settlers' ingenuity. They combined European knowledge with local resources, utilized native guidance, and displayed resilience in the face of hardship. Yet, despite these adaptations, the colony's ultimate fate remained uncertain, a reminder of the limits of planning when confronted with the unknown. The Lost Colony also inspired contemporary educational programs. Schools, universities, and museums incorporated Roanoke into curricula exploring early American history, cultural exchange, and environmental adaptation. Students engaged with primary sources, archaeological evidence, and critical analysis, learning to balance historical fact with interpretive reasoning. The story of Roanoke became a tool for teaching analytical thinking, historical methodology, and cultural awareness, connecting modern learners with centuries-old mysteries. In addition to scholarly work, cultural interpretations flourished. Films, novels, and artistic representations explored themes of disappearance, survival, and cultural blending. The narrative allowed for exploration of human resilience, the impact of environment, and the tension between ambition and uncertainty. The enduring appeal of Roanoke lay not only in what was known, but in what remained unknown, the gaps in the historical record that allowed imagination to fill in the spaces left by time. Contemporary debates continue regarding the fate of the settlers. Were they entirely assimilated into native tribes? Did some attempt migration inland to escape hardship? Could disease or conflict have eliminated entire groups? Each hypothesis draws on archaeological evidence, historical documents, oral tradition, and scientific analysis. While consensus remains elusive, these debates maintain scholarly engagement and public fascination, ensuring that Roanoke continues to occupy a prominent place in both academic and cultural discourse. The word Croatoan remains central to the story. Its persistent presence in historical records, cultural narratives, and public imagination embodies the mystery, offering a tangible link to the vanished colony. It symbolizes unanswered questions, human ambition, survival, and the complex interplay of culture, environment, and history. Researchers continue to examine its meaning, placement, and implications, while storytellers embrace its evocative power. Ultimately, Roanoke Island represents a convergence of human endeavor, environmental challenge, and historical enigma. It demonstrates the fragility and resilience of human societies, the complexity of cultural exchange, and the enduring power of mystery. From the earliest settlers to modern scholars, the narrative bridges centuries, connecting past ambitions with contemporary inquiry and blending historical fact with imaginative speculation. The Lost Colony stands as a testament to human courage, adaptability, and the unknown. Its story persists through artifacts, oral histories, scholarly research, and cultural memory. Roanoke's legacy invites reflection on the consequences of exploration, the interplay of environment and human action, and the enduring question of how history is constructed from both evidence and imagination. The island's forests, rivers, and shores hold echoes of those who once lived there, preserving their story even as the mystery remains unresolved. Roanoke Island continues to captivate historians, archaeologists, educators, and curious minds worldwide. The story inspires investigation, reflection, and creative expression, reminding us that history is never fully complete and that mysteries endure, inviting each generation to explore, question, and imagine. The lost colony's enduring allure lies not only in the disappearance of its settlers, but in the ongoing pursuit of understanding, a quest as compelling today as it was centuries ago, anchored by a single haunting word, Croaton. Even as scholars delve deeper into records and artifacts, Roanoke Island continued to defy simple explanation. Each excavation revealed layers of human activity, yet the narrative remained fragmented. Foundations hinted at dwellings abandoned suddenly, while small tools and fragments of pottery suggested careful daily routines interrupted abruptly. Soil layers indicated cultivation and managed landscapes, but patterns of sudden abandonment left historians puzzled. The island itself seemed to guard its secrets, revealing only fragments to those persistent enough to look. In the 1950s and 1960s, archaeological techniques advanced, bringing systematic study to the area. Ground surveys mapped soil disturbances, while careful cataloging of artifacts offered insight into daily life. Skeletal remains were sparse, and those found often could not be definitively linked to the original settlers. Yet scattered items, English-style buttons, remnants of clothing, metal tools, pointed toward a community that had adapted as best it could to a challenging and unfamiliar environment. Contemporary historians debated the causes of the disappearance. One theory suggested assimilation with local tribes. Croatoan and neighboring groups recounted English individuals living among them, contributing labor, adopting customs, and intermarrying. Oral histories told of families moving inland, quietly integrating into tribal communities and leaving traces in culture, language, and genealogy. Though material evidence was scarce, the persistence of these stories across generations lent credibility to the possibility of partial survival. Another theory focused on environmental and logistical factors. Harsh weather, unpredictable storms, soil depletion, and limited food supplies may have forced settlers to relocate or perish. Disease, from both local and imported pathogens, could have claimed lives rapidly, leaving survivors to seek refuge with native communities. Archaeological evidence supported these possibilities, revealing disrupted tools and sudden abandonment of structures. The interplay of environment, disease, and human decision-making created conditions in which survival was tenuous, and the colony's fate uncertain. During the late 20th century, DNA studies and genealogical research introduced new tools to investigate the colony's legacy. Comparisons of regional populations with known English lineages suggested possible integration into native communities. While definitive proof remained elusive, these findings encouraged renewed exploration into hidden survivor lineages, descendants of the lost colony, if they existed, had likely dispersed across multiple tribal groups, their English heritage preserved in subtle ways that evaded traditional historical documentation. Cultural engagement with the mystery flourished. Documentaries, historical fiction, and interpretive museums brought Roanoke to global attention. Scholars collaborated with filmmakers and educators, ensuring that storytelling remained anchored in historical evidence while engaging public imagination. The Lost Colony's narrative transcended simple fact. It became a lens to explore survival, adaptation, human psychology, and cross-cultural interaction in the early colonial period. One particularly evocative reconstruction involved the settlers' potential inland journey. Researchers combined historical maps, oral accounts, and topographical analysis to chart routes that families may have taken. Dense forests, winding rivers, and marshes would have presented both obstacles and resources, requiring navigation skill, knowledge of edible plants, and cooperation among settlers. Some theorists speculated that smaller groups splintered, following waterways to remote settlements, seeking safety and sustenance. These reconstructions underscored both the ingenuity and the vulnerability of human communities facing the unknown. The word Croatoan continued to inspire speculation. Scholars analyzed White's original inscriptions, comparing them to local geography and potential tribal connections. Some suggested the word indicated direction toward the Croatoan tribe's territory, while others argued it might have been a message of survival, a marker for allies, or even a symbolic warning. The ambiguity ensured that Croatoan retained its enigmatic power, a focal point for historical interpretation and imaginative inquiry alike. Interactions between settlers and native communities remained a critical area of study. Historical records described alliances, trade, and occasional conflict. Evidence of combined agricultural techniques suggested practical collaboration, while oral histories highlighted shared cultural practices. These interactions, complex and often subtle, may have enabled certain individuals or families to survive beyond the period of disappearance. The challenge for historians has been to trace these patterns amid the overlay of centuries, environmental change, and limited documentation. Archaeological digs in the late 20th and early 21st centuries discovered additional clues. Fragments of English pottery, metal tools, and clothing fasteners were found inland, sometimes in association with native artifacts. Carbon dating confirmed chronological alignment with the late 16th century. Soil analysis revealed signs of managed agriculture, controlled fire, and human settlement, suggesting that at least some colonists had survived temporarily in areas away from the original Roanoke site. These discoveries provided tangible evidence supporting theories of dispersal and partial assimilation. Modern interpretations emphasize the resilience of the colonists. Survival in unfamiliar territory required adaptation, strategic use of resources, and negotiation with local populations. Scholars highlight that failure was not solely a result of incompetence, but of confronting an environment that was both abundant and perilous. Disease, weather, and social dynamics combined to create unpredictable conditions, testing the limits of endurance and ingenuity. Public engagement with Roanoke's story remains vibrant. Visitors to the island explore reconstructed homes, examine artifacts in museums, and participate in guided tours that blend historical evidence with storytelling. Festivals and educational programs ensure that the narrative of the lost colony reaches new audiences, emphasizing both the historical reality and the enduring mystery. The story serves as a bridge connecting modern America with its colonial past, illustrating themes of survival, cultural exchange, and human ambition. Debates continue regarding the ultimate fate of the settlers. Some historians maintain that assimilation with native communities is the most plausible explanation, supported by oral histories and material evidence. Others argue that environmental hazards, disease, or violence likely resulted in death and disappearance. The true resolution may never be known, yet the mystery itself remains central to Roanoke's enduring appeal. It is this uncertainty, combined with careful historical reconstruction, that captivates both scholars and the public. The lost colony's influence extends beyond academic discourse. Literature, films, and art frequently draw upon Roanoke's narrative to explore broader themes: human resilience, confrontation with the unknown, and the intersection of culture and environment. These cultural representations perpetuate fascination, inviting new generations to engage with history creatively while remaining mindful of evidence and analysis. In sum, Roanoke Island exemplifies the interplay between human endeavor, environmental forces, and the unknown. Its legacy persists in archaeological evidence, oral histories, genealogical research, and cultural imagination. While mysteries remain unresolved, ongoing research continues to illuminate aspects of survival, adaptation, and cultural integration. The lost colony serves as both a historical case study and a symbol of enduring curiosity, illustrating how human societies navigate uncertainty and preserve memory across centuries. The word CROATO remains etched in history and imagination, a reminder of the enduring question that defines Roanoke. What became of those who vanished? And how did their story persist in the land, culture, and memory of America? Scholars, enthusiasts, and visitors alike confront this question, seeking evidence, interpretation, and connection, yet finding that part of the story remains forever elusive. Ultimately, Roanoke Island teaches lessons about ambition, resilience, adaptation, and mystery. It demonstrates how human communities respond to environmental, social, and logistical challenges, while highlighting the enduring power of legend and memory. The Lost Colony continues to engage imaginations, provoke inquiry, and inspire reflection, ensuring that even centuries after disappearance, the story of Roanoke remains vivid, compelling, and hauntingly unresolved. The mystery of Roanoke continued to haunt historians well into the 21st century. As more evidence emerged, questions of survival, relocation, and cultural integration became increasingly nuanced. Scholars revisited historical documents, including John White's meticulous maps, letters from investors, and reports of early explorers. They sought patterns, connections, and clues that might explain the disappearance. Yet each document, no matter how detailed, revealed more uncertainty than certainty. Local geography played a crucial role in the colony's story. Rivers, estuaries, and marshlands crisscrossed the island and surrounding areas, offering both sustenance and danger. Dense forests concealed pathways, allowing small groups to move undetected, but also presenting disorientation and the risk of isolation. Settlers faced the constant challenge of navigating this complex environment while securing food, shelter, and safety. Survival required knowledge of the land, adaptability, and cooperation, traits that may have determined who endured and who vanished. The possibility of assimilation into native communities gained further attention. Croatoan and nearby tribes recounted stories passed down through generations. English settlers marrying into tribes, adopting local customs, and contributing labor and knowledge. Some stories suggested that groups of settlers moved inland, integrating quietly, while others described conflict or disease outbreaks that decimated small populations. These oral histories, corroborated in part by archaeological findings, reinforced the idea that some colonists may have survived. Though hidden from the European record, archaeological digs continued to uncover compelling evidence. Foundations of small structures, remnants of fire pits, and English-style artifacts mixed with native tools painted a picture of cultural blending and survival strategies. Carbon dating confirmed that these materials corresponded with the period of the lost colony. The evidence suggested not only survival, but adaptation. Settlers may have learned from their native neighbors, adopting agricultural methods, hunting strategies, and social practices necessary for enduring the New World. Theories regarding relocation inland or to adjacent islands gained traction. Historical maps, combined with soil and environmental studies, allowed researchers to hypothesize potential routes of migration. Small groups could have traveled along rivers and overland pathways, establishing temporary or permanent settlements while avoiding hostile encounters. These reconstructions emphasized both the ingenuity and vulnerability of the colonists, highlighting the precarious nature of survival in an unpredictable environment. European political context influenced both the fate of the colony and the historical record. England's focus on continental conflicts, maritime dominance, and colonial expansion elsewhere diverted attention and resources from Roanoke. Supply missions were delayed, and reinforcements were inconsistent, leaving settlers isolated. This geopolitical backdrop amplified the challenges faced on the island, illustrating how broader political forces intersected with individual survival and local dynamics. Modern genetic studies added another dimension to the investigation. DNA comparisons of regional populations with known English lineages suggested possible integration of Roanoke descendants into native communities. While results were inconclusive, they provided tantalizing hints of continuity, suggesting that some families persisted quietly, their heritage absorbed into broader cultural networks. This research underscored the complexity of tracing survival and the interplay between historical documentation and biological legacy. Cultural representations of Roanoke evolved alongside scholarly inquiry. Documentaries, novels, and films explored the disappearance with both historical fidelity and creative speculation. Storytellers examined themes of resilience, adaptation, and human endurance, while also embracing the narrative tension of unresolved mystery. Public fascination thrived on the ambiguity. What truly happened, and how did the colonists' story continue beyond the evidence preserved in maps, artifacts, and oral histories? The enigmatic word, Croaton, remained central. Its ambiguous inscription fueled decades of speculation, symbolizing both a clue and a mystery. Scholars debated its meaning, a marker for relocation, a sign of alliance, a warning, or a record of survival. Its persistence in the historical record reinforced the narrative tension, reminding both researchers and the public that some questions may never be fully answered. Reconstructions of daily life offered insights into the colonists' strategies. Archaeologists and historians examined tools, shelters, clothing remnants, and agricultural evidence to understand adaptation. Settlers combined European skills with local knowledge, producing a hybrid culture capable of sustaining life under challenging conditions. These reconstructions highlighted human ingenuity, emphasizing problem-solving, resource management, and cross-cultural learning as critical components of survival. Environmental hazards played an enduring role. Seasonal storms, flooding, unpredictable tides, and wildlife all contributed to the colony's vulnerability. Analysis of sediment layers, floodplains, and soil fertility indicated that these challenges may have disrupted settlements, destroyed crops, and prompted relocation. Environmental pressures, combined with social dynamics and disease, created a situation where survival required constant adaptation, resilience, and vigilance. Oral histories provided further context. Descendants of native communities recounted stories of English settlers participating in trade, agriculture, and cultural practices. Some narratives described English-speaking children raised among tribes, preserving elements of European heritage. Others recounted episodes of conflict, displacement, or disease outbreaks. The persistence of these stories suggested that while the settlers' material presence may have diminished, their cultural and social influence endured in subtle ways. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, interdisciplinary studies offered deeper understanding. Archaeologists, historians, environmental scientists, and anthropologists collaborated to reconstruct settlement patterns, daily life, and survival strategies. Combined analysis of artifacts, soil, topography, and oral histories created a richer, though still incomplete, picture of Roanoke. Researchers highlighted both resilience and vulnerability, emphasizing the intricate interplay between human agency and environmental forces. The lost colony's legacy extended beyond historical analysis. Educational programs, museum exhibits, and public events engaged communities with both evidence and narrative. Visitors explored reconstructed settlements, handled replica artifacts, and participated in interpretive tour, blending scholarship with storytelling. These programs emphasized critical thinking, historical methodology, and the complexity of interpreting evidence, connecting modern audiences with centuries-old mysteries. Debates over the colony's fate persisted. Scholars considered multiple possibilities: assimilation with native tribes, inland migration, disease and starvation, or complete annihilation. Each hypothesis drew on a combination of archaeological data, historical documents, and oral traditions. While definitive answers remained elusive, the ongoing discussion kept Roanoke at the forefront of historical inquiry, illustrating how unresolved questions can drive research, imagination, and cultural engagement. The story of Roanoke continues to inspire reflection on human ambition, survival, and adaptation. Settlers confronted challenges, both expected and unforeseen, navigating unfamiliar landscapes, negotiating cultural boundaries, and responding to environmental pressures. The interplay of planning, improvisation, and circumstance shaped their experience, creating a narrative rich in both triumph and tragedy. Ultimately, Roanoke Island exemplifies the convergence of history, mystery, and human experience. Its story persists in artifacts, documents, oral histories, and imagination. The enduring question, what became of the lost colony, continues to provoke study, speculation, and creative interpretation. Scholars, students, and the public remain engaged, exploring evidence, reconstructing narratives, and reflecting on the lessons embedded in this centuries-old enigma. The word Croatoan endures as a symbol of curiosity, resilience, and the unknown. It represents both a clue to survival and a reminder of the limits of knowledge. Roanoke's legacy challenges modern audiences to consider the fragility and adaptability of human communities, the complexity of cultural interaction, and the enduring power of mystery. The island remains a touchstone for historical inquiry, a site where the past meets imagination, and where questions without definitive answers continue to inspire wonder. Roanoke Island teaches that history is not merely a record of events, but also an ongoing dialogue between evidence, interpretation, and human imagination. Each generation of researchers, storytellers, and visitors contributes to this dialogue, exploring the boundaries between fact and conjecture, certainty and mystery. The Lost Colony's story bridges centuries, offering lessons in resilience, adaptation, and the enduring human fascination with the unknown. As researchers continue to investigate, every artifact, oral account, and environmental clue offers a potential insight. Foundations suggest habitation, artifacts reveal daily practices, and oral traditions preserve stories of survival. Even as some questions remain unresolved, the pursuit of understanding ensures that Roanoke continues to occupy a central place in American historical consciousness. The island is at once a place of learning, speculation, and imagination, bridging history and storytelling, evidence and mystery. Ultimately, the lost colony of Roanoke endures as a testament to human endeavor, the challenge of survival, and the enduring power of unresolved history. Its lessons span centuries, encompassing resilience, adaptation, cultural exchange, and the enigmatic forces of nature and circumstance. The story continues to captivate scholars, educators, and the public alike, reminding us that the past is never fully settled, and that some mysteries endure not for lack of inquiry, but because their complexity invites endless exploration. As the 21st century progressed, interest in Roanoke Island surged with new technologies and research methodologies. Ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR mapping, and advanced excavation techniques allowed scholars to examine previously inaccessible areas. Dense forests and marshlands, once impenetrable obstacles, could now be scanned from above, revealing traces of habitation, pathways, and subtle environmental modifications. Each discovery added nuance to the colony's story, highlighting the delicate balance between human activity and natural reclamation. Modern interpretations emphasized the resilience of the settlers, while the colony's ultimate fate remained uncertain. Evidence suggested that those who survived demonstrated remarkable ingenuity. Tools adapted for local conditions, hybrid agricultural techniques, and interaction with native communities all reflected adaptive strategies necessary for survival. Researchers recognized that the lost colony was not merely a story of disappearance, but also a narrative of human endurance, resourcefulness, and cultural negotiation. Contemporary cultural engagement reflected this duality. Museums, educational programs, and historical reenactments presented both the evidence and the mystery. Visitors explored reconstructed settlements, examined replicas of tools and clothing, and engaged with interactive exhibits detailing daily life, environmental hazards, and potential escape routes. The word Croatoan was prominently featured, symbolizing both historical fact and enduring enigma. Its presence provoked discussion, imagination, and speculation, bridging centuries of inquiry with contemporary curiosity. Ongoing genealogical studies added another dimension. Researchers examined DNA from regional populations, tracing potential lineages back to English settlers. While definitive conclusions were limited by centuries of integration and migration, preliminary results suggested that elements of the lost colony's heritage may persist in subtle ways within both native and non-native populations. This research highlighted the long-term influence of the colony, extending beyond physical artifacts into the living genetic and cultural landscape. The environmental context remained central to understanding the colony's challenges. Seasonal storms, flooding, and unpredictable river channels created both opportunity and hazard. Soil analysis revealed areas of cultivation, yet patterns of erosion and sediment deposition indicated that crops may have failed intermittently. Wildlife interactions, from foraging to predation, further complicated survival. Researchers concluded that the interplay of environment, disease, social dynamics, and limited resources likely created conditions in which the colony could not sustain itself fully. Yet, pockets of survival remained possible. Modern archaeological findings reinforced the idea of hybrid communities. Artifacts revealed a blending of European and native technologies, English-style pottery, alongside locally crafted tools, metal implements used in combination with indigenous techniques. Structural remains indicated adaptation to the environment. Dwellings raised above floodplains, efficient storage systems, and use of locally sourced materials. These findings suggested that even amid uncertainty and hardship, settlers exhibited ingenuity and an ability to integrate into their surroundings. Debates over the fate of the colony persisted in both scholarly and popular discourse. Some argued for total annihilation due to disease or conflict, others for assimilation into native communities, while yet others proposed migration inland to establish new, hidden settlements. Each theory drew on different combinations of archaeological evidence, historical documentation, and oral traditions. The continued lack of definitive proof ensured that Roanoke's story remained a fertile ground for exploration, discussion, and imagination. Cultural representations played a critical role in shaping public perception. Novels, films, and documentaries explored themes of survival, disappearance, and cultural integration. Writers emphasized suspense and human drama, often speculating on the unseen lives of those who vanished. Educational programs incorporated these narratives, balancing historical evidence with imaginative reconstruction. allowing audiences to engage with both the mystery and the historical context. The lost colony's significance extended beyond history into lessons for resilience and adaptation. Scholars highlighted how settlers' experiences illustrated the importance of resource management, environmental awareness, and cross-cultural negotiation. The colony's challenges provided insights into the complexities of early colonial life, emphasizing that ambition alone could not ensure survival in an unpredictable and often hostile environment. Artifacts and oral histories combined to illuminate patterns of survival. English tools and personal items found inland suggested dispersal and integration, while native accounts corroborated the presence of European settlers within tribal communities. Together, these sources painted a picture of survival strategies, adaptation, and cultural exchange. Even in the absence of full clarity, the evidence demonstrated human ingenuity and perseverance in the face of adversity. Modern historians and archaeologists continue to examine Roanoke with interdisciplinary methods, collaboration among experts in environmental science, anthropology, archaeology, and historical analysis allows for nuanced interpretations. Studies of soil composition, settlement patterns, and artifact distribution provide insights into daily life, while genetic research and oral traditions explore potential survivor lineages. This comprehensive approach bridges centuries of inquiry, combining empirical evidence with human narrative to reconstruct a story that is both factual and profoundly enigmatic. The word Croaton remains the centerpiece of intrigue. Its meaning, placement, and intent continue to provoke debate. Was it a marker for relocation, a sign of alliance, a record of survival, or something else entirely? Its ambiguity ensures that it continues to symbolize both mystery and human curiosity, connecting the past to present inquiry. For scholars, enthusiasts, and the public alike, it embodies the tension between knowledge and uncertainty, evidence and speculation. Ultimately, Roanoke Island serves as a testament to the complexity of human history. It exemplifies the challenges of colonization, the resilience required for survival, and the interplay of environment, culture, and circumstance. The lost colony's story bridges centuries, connecting early settlers' experiences with modern inquiry, imagination, and cultural reflection. It remains both a historical case study and a symbol of enduring mystery, inspiring exploration across disciplines and generations. The island's forests, rivers, and marshes preserve echoes of those who once lived there. Archaeologists, historians, and visitors trace the movements of settlers, examine artifacts, and reconstruct possible scenarios. Yet the ultimate fate of many remains unknown. This absence of definitive resolution ensures that Roanoke continues to captivate, illustrating how history can simultaneously educate, inspire, and provoke wonder. In conclusion, the lost colony of Roanoke is a story of ambition, adaptation, resilience, and mystery. Its legacy persists in physical evidence, oral traditions, genealogical hints, and cultural memory. The narrative demonstrates the limits of human knowledge, the power of environmental forces, and the enduring allure of unresolved history. Roanoke challenges us to consider what it means to survive, to adapt, and to be remembered, even when the full story is lost to time. The enduring fascination with Roanoke underscores a fundamental human trait: the desire to understand, interpret, and connect with the past. Its lessons resonate across centuries, illustrating how humans navigate uncertainty, confront adversity, and leave traces, material, cultural, and genetic, that echo far beyond their immediate existence. The Lost Colony continues to inspire inquiry, imagination, and reflection, ensuring that its story, while never fully resolved, remains one of America's most compelling historical enigmas. Even today, the story of Roanoke Island continues to captivate scholars, students, and curious minds worldwide. From meticulous archaeological study to speculative fiction, from educational programs to museum exhibitions, the colony's narrative persists, bridging gaps between past and present. It serves as both a historical lesson and a source of enduring wonder, illustrating the intricate interplay of survival, adaptation, and mystery. The word Croatoan endures, etched in history and imagination. It represents the unknown, survival against the odds, cultural exchange, and the human impulse to seek answers. For generations, it has symbolized the tantalizing intersection of evidence and conjecture, reminding us that some mysteries endure not for lack of inquiry, but because their complexity demands endless exploration. Roanoke Island remains a testament to human courage, ingenuity, and the limits of knowledge. Its story encompasses tragedy and survival, certainty and ambiguity, history and legend. The Lost Colony challenges us to imagine, investigate, and reflect, demonstrating that the past is a living dialogue between evidence and interpretation, between fact and story, and between generations separated by centuries, yet connected by curiosity. The island continues to call to those who seek to understand, preserving lessons of resilience, adaptation, and the enduring power of mystery. Its forests, waterways, and ruins stand as silent witnesses to the ambitions, struggles, and ingenuity of early settlers. Roanoke teaches that history is not merely a record of events, but a canvas of questions, evidence, and imagination, inviting each generation to engage, explore, and reflect. The story of Roanoke Island, from its early settlers to modern researchers, remains an emblem of curiosity, endurance, and the unknown. The Lost Colony, though never fully understood, continues to inspire, educate, and captivate. It reminds us that history is as much about the questions we ask as the answers we find, and that some mysteries endure precisely because they challenge us to think, explore, and imagine.